myself. It's time to realize.
Welcome to the Biocharisma Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Gardner. This week we have Dr. Narco Longo. I'm going to try and find out what that synonym is actually, or pseudonym, what it actually refers to. This young man, he's been a wonderful, wonderful resource of information dealing with Atlantis, Old World Florida, and everything to deal with what could have been the mythological old world. You guys have listened, hopefully, to my podcast I did with Gabriel Peters, Slick Dissident, where we discussed the possibility that the United States, not just the United States, but the continental North America was actually the old world that was spoken about in Greek mythology. Dr. Narcolongo's work talks a lot about how the largest Greek colony in the world, other than in Greece, was in, I believe it's New Smyrna Beach, Florida. We're going to talk about all these different cities and landscapes that I grew up around. And when you're a Floridian, especially when you're a disco baby and grow up in the 80s and 90s there was still some mystery. The population really hadn't popped yet, and you could still get your feet into nature and, urban nature, but still there was a lot of things going on there that as a child, I had lots of questions and not many answers. So it's been such a wonderful resource to have the Old World Florida YouTube site, because I just throw on a video and it brings me back to my childhood, and then also brings me to one of the great topics of inspection for me, which is Atlantis. After reading Timaeus in ninth grade, I was obsessed with Atlantis, and then I've had friends that have done a lot of alchemical work, like Dr. Moshe Daniel, that discuss Atlantis, and it's a wonderful allegory, if anything, for our time now. The many different similarities that are described. So we'll get into all these resonating subjects and dive deep into it. I think I have him for a couple hours, so enjoy the podcast, and I'll see you on the flip side. We are here with Dr. Narco Longo of Old World Florida YouTube channel. How's it going, my man?
I'm doing well. How are you, Chris?
I'm awesome. I am so happy to be having this interview because I'm a Floridian. You're a Floridian. We got to unite. We got to stay together. I heard you on the Juan and Juan podcast, I believe about 2 months ago. And ever since then, I think I've consumed all of your media except one video. I hope I haven't been bugging you too much on IG.
Not at all.
Great.
I think you're breathing and catching some wind on the mic, it seems like.
I'm I'm down in Costa Rica, and the only room I could get that had decent lighting, the only way it's not like sweltering hot, is I have to have the fan on super high. So
that's right.
It's a little bit. Can you really hear the fan?
A little bit, but it's okay.
Yeah.
I'll bear with it. Don't worry.
Yeah. My guys will clean it up in post.
Okay.
So I kind of want to start with you. I would like for you to describe to my audience sort of what your big picture view of our cosmology is, because from what I've been able to discern from your videos is you don't believe the standard narrative of history anywhere close to it. And you have this beautiful blend of mixing astronomy with astrology, with geography, with, getting into clothes, getting into dyes, getting into all these different things. You're pretty much a holotropic thinker. Like I kind of have self-branded myself that way too, where you just pick all these little things all over the place, and before you know it, you have this convex dome that's like focusing a pretty coherent view of the world. So I'd like for you to describe to people how you actually see this existence. Like, what is this existence, and where are we at in it?
I don't know, man. That's a pretty broad place to start.
It is.
That's kind of like a 105 mile per hour pitch,
Yes, I'll calm it down because I have a tendency to do that. Um, let's back up a minute to your last video that I watched about the baobab trees in Hollywood. So I grew up just in Plantation, Florida, like just up the street from Hollywood, and I used to love going to Hollywood because of its trees. When I was a kid, it was like the last place in South Florida where you had all the live oaks, and
Okay.
there were so many neighborhoods where we could climb the live oaks. Like my neighborhood in Plantation, which you just shot a video on the Plantation golf course. Um, if I don't know if the banyan trees are still around in that neighborhood, but like that was my friends and I, like we lived in those banyan trees. And so we were always tree climbers. And so we had friends in this neighborhood in Hollywood, East Hollywood, not all the way east by A1A, but we would go and we got to climb these huge oak trees. And that circle, that what was the name of that park with the circle and this
Young Circle.
Young Circle?
Mhm.
So Young Circle, before they renovated it, they just renovated it. When was that? In 2008, you said?
It was about 2007.
Yes. Like
Hmm.
in the mid 90s, that Young Circle was nowhere near as nice, but it was still a pretty cool spot, especially for us teenagers that, we weren't of age and we could kind of just like hang out and kind of goof around and stuff like that. And they used to take like all the different photos for like if you were an accomplished, like if you have accomplished something, they would take it in that circle with the backdrop
Hmm.
of those trees. So
Wow.
yeah, it's really cool. So I'm so happy that you brought that up in Coral Gables.
You
And then
know the do you know the bit about the 9/11 terrorists?
no, do tell.
Okay, you're gonna like this. So, and I'm not, saying, of course, I'm not going with the mainstream narrative of the 9/11 attacks, but in the mainstream narrative, the attackers, the terrorists, actually dined at Young Circle. They ate at an oyster cart or an oyster bar inside the circle, and then they set off for the attacks the next day. So they were actually in that circle with those sacred baobab trees in that control the fountain and the music in that circle. So who knows?
What do you think do you think that's a redirect of spiritual energy by trying to insert them into that narrative?
Beats me, man. That's You're gonna have to ask God that one because I think now without digging myself too deep a grave, there's some rotten apples in the Hollywood Broward government. There always have been. Not now. They're all great people now, right? But uh, you know, there's been some events that have happened in that county. Um, you know, that's all I'll say about that.
Oh, I know it well. It was very well known in the circles of my family. My dad
Mhm.
was a commercial contractor, and my stepfather was a surgeon in Broward County. So I grew up with all the tales, all the Miami Vice
Mhm.
tales,
And
seeing the.
it's interesting they called it Hollywood
Mhm.
because there's no explanation for that other than yeah.
Well, that beach is very significant because it
Hmm.
felt the best. I forget what the park is that's just to the north of Hollywood Beach, but it was like the last nude beach in Fort Lauderdale when I was a little
Hmm.
boy.
Oh
But it
yeah.
was also the last place where they had mangroves, like that
Mm.
far south. So we would take
Hmm.
we would take these nature expeditions down there, and it was really funny. They took us on like a they took us on a little field trip there when I was like 10 years old, and it was really funny. We were sitting there, and I turn around and I see this nude woman, and my friend Craig, he just starts screaming and going crazy, and before you know it, that nude woman had like 15 boys running after her. It was a pretty funny scene in the mid 80s.
So, with the baobab trees, I guess like that is a good starting point for what you could call my worldview is, a lot of old world channels show the architecture, right? And it's kind of only architecture that they have to show you magnificent stuff, and that's all there is to talk about. I like to approach things from, like you said, the linguistics, but also things like cuisine, fashion, dyes, like you said, the clothing styles. All these threads can be pulled, and you can arrive at similar, rabbit holes. Similar truths. It's all there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the architecture was a good starting point. But I think to fill in all the cracks, you have to look for all those in between things, like like the cuisine. And for example, Florida, there's peppers and stuff here that people have no idea where they come from. There's a type of honey up in the Panhandle, very unique and similar to a type of honey in the Old Testament, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
All these little things all over Florida. But so with the trees, my view of the whole world. Why do the trees matter? Well, you see all these towers going up now, right? 5G towers and such. Well, that's what's coming in. What went out, right? In with the new, out with the old. What had to go out was the trees.
Mm-hmm.
And the big, tall, giant trees is essentially a 5G tower for good, right?
Right.
Pumping out good vibes across the land, casting it across the people, the cities, and everyone reaps the benefits. And those live oaks actually keep the temperature about
Lower.
15 degrees cooler, because you have the wind blowing through there, and just it's divinely created to just cool this hot place down. And of course they took a lot of those out. But as far as the big trees, the tall ones, the ancestral trees, you have oaks and ashes have been worshipped by people as far back as you go. Well, those are both found in Florida. Of all 4 major trees of different world faiths, traditions that worship trees as like a principal deity or along with a principal deity, for example, Buddha and the banyan tree. Buddha sat under a banyan tree and attained enlightenment. Well, Krishna was under a baobab tree. Krishna was under a kalpavriksha, which is the Indian name for a baobab. So banyan, baobab, oaks. What else? The kapok tree. So the kapok tree is the sacred tree to the Aztec, Maya, and a couple different Mesoamerican cultures. And it's no coincidence that you have all of those trees are found here in Florida, which, if you know about my channel, I've been alleging to be the Garden of Eden, right? The one and only true Garden of Eden. And but the trees, something that I haven't really talked much about on other channels, tree incarnation, right? Everyone's into this reincarnation stuff, but they're barking up the wrong tree, right? So
no, I get it, because you showed that, and ever since you showed that on your video, it jogged my memory. But you have these hills that could be these mounds, quote unquote, that could be pyramids, and they have a tree right in the center, planted at the top. And all of us people that are into permaculture, we always know, like, if you bury, some sort of animal that had locomotion in it, and you bury it and you give that to, a new tree that you're putting in the ground, the vitality is transferred. And it makes so much sense that there's this huge amount of bioenergetic flow, because when you see a tree, whatever, however high it's going is how low it's going. It's mirroring itself.
Well,
And
sorry, keep
no,
going.
go for it.
If you'd like to know what I believe in, I believe what everyone believes in, because there's actually only one belief system on the planet. And most people are ignorant of this belief system. In ancient pagan times, before the church was on this earth, when people passed away, they were burned, and their ash, depending on their family and gender, was either placed under an oak tree or an ash tree. Right,
Mm-hmm.
this is where the origin of the ash tree.
Mm-hmm.
And this system, when you burn a human body, you're left with 12 mineral salts found in the ash. And these 12 mineral salts, with, after all the moisture and the essence has been taken out of the body through the fire, you're left with the bare components of a human body, the bare building bricks, building blocks. So those 12, and these are cell salts, by the way, mineral salts, 12 mineral salts left over in human ash. That's how they were discovered, was they studied human ash and found these 12 mineral salts. They, of course, correspond to each sign of the zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
But these mineral salts are known to be reabsorbed into the roots of trees when planted in the earth beneath them. So you're talking about a body. And I agree with you, like entire body and decomposing things are good for the tree too. But in this, it would be the ash that would actually be kind of soaked into the root directly. And when you die, your soul escapes. Your soul.
Yeah.
Or in some interpretations, the spirit flies out. The spirit, the soul, whatever you want to call it, immediately when you pass. But your body's still here. And this was the way to actually return the body, to synthesize it back into nature, like very efficiently. Mm-hmm. And by putting the ash under the roots, your essence would start to be absorbed into that tree. And these were old trees. These were family trees. This is where the family concept of the family tree comes from. Mm-hmm. So when you were being absorbed into the tree, you would go into the roots, you'd go into the sap, and you would be pushed up towards the leaves. And as your essence was pushed up towards those leaves, as you enter those leaves, you then become the leaves. And this is the bee leaf system. You now have become a leaf. And this is where it gets a little weird, but hey, we're living in weird times today. The sunlight would hit those leaves. And after some time, leaves would fall, and they would be collected even and made tea out of. And these people would actually be able to make tea from their family tree. Mm-hmm. And it's not like a cannibalistic thing or anything like that. It was a sacred act. And they would do this to infuse the family essence, because family mattered to these people. Blood mattered, right?
Yes.
These things mattered immensely. Mm-hmm. So by doing so, and by nourishing this tree and allowing it to nourish you back, the family would be strengthened. And we don't even know what a strong family is today. We think 5 kids and not divorced, and we think that's a strong family. We don't even know. These were the families that were creating the megalithic sites and such. This is pre-paradise time. And in this system, with these trees still standing and growing about as high in the sky as you could see, some of them, you would reincarnate into your family. Mm-hmm. So you were not arbitrarily assigned a human body, because that's what a lot of people deal with when they start believing in reincarnation. Well, what is it, all random? Why are we all forgetting? We're not designed to forget. That's a symptom of how low we've fallen. But with the tree system in place, you remember where you're from. You actually reincarnate into your own family. What's the point of being good and virtuous if you have no idea if your children will be good and virtuous? You can do as good as you can as a parent, but is there ever 100% assurance? Never. And let's look at the flip side. What's the point of being an evil banker or world ruler if there's the chance your children are going to be good and virtuous? There's no point. All the dominoes could fall over. So things aren't left to chance like that. So you'll notice certain people have giant trees on their property. In Florida, for example, the largest kapok in the continental United States is on Henry Flagler's property, where he used to live in Palm Beach, Florida. The largest banyan tree in the continental Americas in Thomas Edison and Henry Ford's estate in Fort Myers, Florida. So you start to see a cycle, a pattern. But to bring it back to that ancient tradition, cutting these trees down was a necessity in what people would today call resets, takeovers, right? Spiritual wars. Those trees had to come down. And in doing so, they have cast a spell of forgetfulness on the whole planet. And, I'm not saying it was the Illuminati out there with saws hacking trees down. It was Americans with ignorance, cutting trees down. I have videos of it on my channel. Right up until the 50s, they were taking trees down about, dozens a day that were 1,000 years old or older when Jesus was born. So over 3,000, 4,000 years old, out in the Everglades, out around Florida. And they were taking them down like blades of grass, essentially.
I love this connection. I don't know, my last name's Gardner, but my original last name was Baumgartner, which was tree gardener in German. And so I came from a family of both foresters and millsmen, like the German side of my family. So I have to say, the first time I saw Avatar, and they took down Home Tree, like I had an extreme visceral response. Like I felt like that was like that was an actual like historical representation. And I've heard all the theories about Avatar and being like, hocus pocus programming for transhumanism. But the way my body was interpreting it was that was actually a real trauma in human history. At least within my family lineage.
That's part of obelisks. I talk about on my channel with my friend Ben from Waking Up with Analog, about how that's largely the origin of a lot of these obelisks and large temples and such, that ideally you don't need a temple like that. But when certain trees, like massive trees, have been cut down, there's actually a void or a vacuum that needs to be filled spiritually. And to the average person, that sounds like, ridiculous. But as soon as you start reading some Masonic material, you understand that this type of stuff means a heck of a lot to them. But like the psychic, the electromagnetic or spiritual imprint of a building. And even if a building has been knocked down, that building actually exists. And same thing, same principle would apply to a tree, especially a 3,000-year-old tree.
Yeah, because it's also it's a dynamic system. It's a living system. So that which has life and it provides life would have such a larger bioenergetic imprint on the landscape. I wonder if it's an inversion when they're doing these massive, obelisks in masonry, because masonry energetically is extremely different than cellulitic material, which wood is. I'm a builder. So I've I've messed with geopolymers. I've cast my own limestone. I've built with
Ooh,
earth. Yeah,
nice.
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Hmm.
But it's not necessarily the most economical way of doing things.
Hmm.
Um, Building with wood takes a lot of care. Like even
Even
at even after you need a break,
no, I was just my AC turned on, but don't worry.
even even after you cut a tree down, anybody that's worked with timbers, you know that it's still alive. Like what it takes to make wood right and make it so it doesn't decompose and stay beautiful, it's a labor of love. Your audio
I'm
is
muted, sorry. But I don't know the first thing about wood, admittedly. Um,
mhm.
I know a little bit about limestone and coquina and some of the geology here in Florida. But
Yeah, I've heard you talk a lot about that, and it's always kind of perked me up because the whole thing with the coquina cowboys, I really appreciate that because my mentor in geopolymers, he essentially talked about how the pyramids on Giza were built out of coquina.
mm, yeah,
It was a geopolymer of coquina, and
yep,
he proved it in the 70s, and they never let him back into Egypt.
yeah. And it's funny that Ed Leedskalnin, the guy who made the Coral Castle, who
Mhm.
claimed to know how the pyramids were made, moved to peninsular Florida
Mhm.
in order to do what he wanted to do, you know.
So let
So,
so let's get into this because what's so fascinating is the geography that you have unmasked. You're showing all these little things about the royal dyes in Florida. I sent you a message about the same type of dye is down
hmm
here on the coast of Costa Rica. There's a very
hmm
specific type of crab. And I don't think
hmm
that crab's around anymore. I haven't seen it in a long time.
yeah,
But the Mayans would come down and they would harvest it once a year, and it was a very specific indigo purple, like
hmm
the right in between indigo and purple, which is like, it's a crazy color. Um,
yeah. The Maya were also harvesting horseshoe crab blood,
mhm.
which is more blue. It looks like It looks like what is that? Like Baja Mountain Dew, like the blue
I haven't seen that.
whatever. It's like a blue Mountain Dew is what it looks like. Their
Okay.
blood. Hmm.
Yeah, I actually have seen horseshoe crab blood. So yes, I
Hmm.
have seen that color. That is a pretty wild color.
Yeah.
But I love this whole thing, the Fertile Crescent being the Gulf of Mexico. Could you dive
Yeah.
into?
I mean, it's obvious. Once I figured it out, it's you can't unsee it. It's a perfect crescent moon, sickle, whatever you want to call it, a courgette. You know, a lot of times they'll say that's not an Arab crescent in Confederate insignia. That's a gorget. And a gorget is a crescent-shaped piece of armor. It's like decorative armor that serves like no real purpose. That kind of 17th or 18th century um, European officers would wear.
Mhm.
And for some reason, the Native Americans of the early 1800s started wearing them. It makes no sense. And they're also wearing medallions with like Queen Elizabeth on them. It's just bizarre.
Mhm.
And uh, I forgot what I was talking about.
Well, here we're talking about the Fertile Crescent and the Gorget.
Yes. Okay. So they'll talk about the gorget, but then they think that they're disproving all Arabic insignia in the Southeast United States by saying, no, that's just a gorget being depicted on state flags. Well, what they don't realize is that the gorget and the crescent of Islam are both depicting the same geographic feature, which is the Gulf of Mexico between peninsular Florida and the Yucatan Peninsula,
Mhm.
which makes the most perfect crescent shaped landmass in the world. And if you want to compare it to crescent moon, you actually get your perfect face in the moon, which is New Orleans sticking out into the Gulf of Mexico is the nose of the crescent moon face. But besides that jutting out, it's a perfect crescent moon. This is, another dead giveaway is the fact that Noah's Ark was said to have circled the Kaaba 3 times before landing in Mount Ararat. Now, when you know like the topography of the Middle East and Mesopotamia, for a boat to have left Iraq, travel south to Saudi Arabia, and then circle a cube that would have been hundreds of feet underwater,
No.
and then go north past Iraq, where it started, north up to the mountains that were actually already the closest high ground in the area, and they could have approached much sooner, but we're told Noah was on the ark for 150 days. So that's very unlikely, and it almost demands that you interpret the story allegorically, right?
Right.
And I'm also not refuting any allegorical interpretations. I myself am a believer of many interpretations of the Noah story, but a allegorical or transcendental interpretation does not negate a literal interpretation. So it's very foolish for people to discredit all literal interpretations of the Bible, but blah blah blah. So with the circling the Kaaba, Noah's Ark circling the Kaaba 3 times, it makes zero sense with a ark departing Iraq and landing in Turkey. However, if an ark were departing Northwest Florida, which is where the Mormons believe that the ark and many other arks to have departed, where E. Calloway, the 1936 Republican candidate for governor in Florida, I'll say that again, 1936 Republican candidate for governor in Florida, who publicly asserted that Florida was the true Garden of Eden. And he pointed out all of the physical landmarks in the Bible that verify this. He pointed out the climate, of course, but also the vegetation, the tree life, the plant life. Mm-hmm. He found petrified wood that had been sawed clean, petrified logs sawed clean.
That's near impossible.
Exactly. So, and many things, but E. Calloway was initiated into the Order of Melchizedek by a mystic in Central Florida by the name of Brown Landone. And from there, he went on this quest and uncovered all this stuff in Northwest Florida. But back to the ark, this guy was talking about the ark. He found the wood that the ark was made of, gopher wood. Mm-hmm. So if you know the Old Testament, gopher wood is what the ark was created out of. It's a word that is never used in Hebrew outside of the Old Testament and is never used in the Old Testament outside of the Noah's Ark story. So gopher wood is only found in one place in the world. It's endemic to Northwest Florida along the Apalachicola River. The Apalachicola is the apple of Eden. This is where you get your apple imagery. And an apple, what came first, the apple or the apple? It doesn't matter. But you have the wood right there. If you've followed my channel, you have the anchors. You could see we found many giant ancient stone anchors in the Tampa Bay area. So boom, you have ancient stone anchors. You have your wood of the ark, and the two people who came up with those theories knew nothing of each other. Then you have two separate colonies of about 1,500 Greeks moving to either coast of Florida. Right before most Americans were in Florida, there was Greeks. So we're not told that in school, but blah, blah, blah. Back to the Kaaba. I'll bring this all home, I promise. With Noah's Ark departing the Gulf of Mexico area, it would make perfect sense that a boat squeezing out of the Gulf of Mexico past either the Straits of Florida or the Straits of the Yucatan would in fact circle Cuba 3 times. Now that's
Now,
very
is Cuba the
possible.
Kaaba? Is that what you're asserting?
Cuba is the Kaaba because you'll see Kaaba is spelled with a K, 2 A's, and an A. Cuba is spelled with a C, U-B-A. It used to be spelled K-U-U-B-A in some instances. So Cuba. But let's think about what the Kaaba is. The Kaaba is a cube, is it not? Kaaba is a cube.
I always,
The
I,
Kaaba is the thing in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, that they worship and do the circles around.
I understand that.
The black cube. So the Kaaba is a cube. What happens when you mix the two words Kaaba and cube?
Kauba.
No, you get Cuba.
Yeah.
So Cuba, and what is the Kaaba? The Kaaba is a piece of meteorite. So, but where is that meteorite from? They don't really tell you. Some people say that it landed right there. Some people say it was brought in. They don't really know. Well, I have a theory. It was from the Chicxulub crater in the Gulf of Mexico, which they think might be the one that killed the fake dinosaurs, right? So that came down in the Gulf of Mexico. Inside the cube, from Cuba, there is a piece of that asteroid. And that impact zone must have changed the entire face of the planet, if it's actually an impact zone. But regardless, for Noah's Ark to circle Cuba makes complete sense, because even with an increase in sea level, the mountains, the peaks of Cuba would have been sticking out of the ground, and that area is tough to navigate. So they probably were pinball around Cuba for a little bit until they got spit out into the Atlantic, after which time it would completely make sense that they would drift either through the Straits of Gibraltar, or if the seas were still high enough, straight over the African continent into Armenia or Turkey, where they landed in the mountains of Ararat. And from there, they would go on to name the rivers and places they found after the rivers and places they had departed. And that's why you get your Iraq and Uruk and land of Ur and Ur and ancient Babylon, Sumeria. Well, this is actually Iroquois. Is it any coincidence that we call Iroquois and Native Americans First Nations people? So Iroquois, etymologically and Kabbalistically, because after all, etymology and phonetics is Kabbalah, just using the English language, is the same. Iroquois, Iraq, right? The Creeks are the Greeks. Creek natives are the Greeks. You can prove that linguistically. You can prove that by the way they dress. You can prove that, by a dozen different angles. But yeah, how's that sounding so far?
It sounds awesome. I want to get to the Cuba thing because we're talking about the crescent.
Yeah.
And then you have the star in that crescent.
Yep, and that's Cuba.
And that's Cuba.
Yeah.
So as I understand the Ka from the Egyptian, the quote unquote Egyptian perspective, we were originally talking about the 12 cell salts of the human once it's been, burnt into ash. And by the way, I'm a connoisseur of ash, because when you build with natural products, you have to have fly ash. You have to have very specific type of ash to mix with your clays to make sure that your clays can solidify.
So like lime.
Yes. Well, lime is more of a calcium carbonate. That's a different product. But most ash at its core is about 50% by weight calcium anyway. So as I understood it, the Ka, like our physical body, even though the soul leaves our body, the Ka, which is like I guess you would call it the physical memory, is stored within the vessel of the body. So you talking about that ash being absorbed by, let's call it the home tree, your family tree. then that through the absorption process and then transpiration, your ka is now being lifted into these leaves, and then these leaves end up becoming a tincture or a tea for your family to actually keep the loop current going for the memory. I love this whole thing, but as I understood it, ka is physical memory. So for Cuba to be the ka, is there any reason, like, why out of all the countries in the Western world would you have Cuba just be absolutely decimated with sanctions, like not allowed to have any way?
And why was Russia sticking their neck out for them the whole time?
Exactly. So this is
when you understand Seminole history and Creek and Muskogee history, because the creeks of Florida go by the name Muskogee.
Okay.
Russia and now takes its name the Muscovites. So Muscovy in St. Petersburg, Russia, and then Muskogees in St. Petersburg, Florida.
Okay.
That is no coincidence. And Tampa Bay, Florida, St. Petersburg was the point of embarkation for the Spanish-American War, largely taking Cuba.
Yeah, they had that was the very first false flag I learned about in college.
Was it the Spanish-American War?
The Spanish-American War.
What was it? They sunk the ship in the harbor or something like that?
They exploded 300 barrels of TNT on. They had a goodwill mission of two frigates and one warship into the Bay of Havana, and the one just happened to explode from terrorists. And this was the kicker. This is what like made me go apeshit in college, was the entire half of the entire Pacific fleet for the US was already circling the Philippines within 24 hours.
Yeah.
And this was in a time where boats to go, thousands of miles took a lot of time. So it was obviously pre-planned. They wanted the rubber from the Philippines. So they had to incite war with the Spanish.
And there was a Moorish presence out there too.
In the Philippines?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I didn't. Please elaborate.
You can even search. It's not my expertise or my territory, but you can even search pictures of Malaysian Moors, and Japanese Moors fighting in the Japanese army around the time World War II came around. And there was a Moorish presence out there, and allegedly they were chased that way. May have been present there already. Who knows? Like I said, I kind of keep my nose down in Florida when it comes to the native history and stuff like that. But
let's get back to Cuba then, because Cuba's huge. Because I grew up doing deep sea fishing.
So do you know why Cuba? Sorry for cutting you off, but do you know why Cuba is the Q?
No.
Cuba is the Q. It's named perfectly. It's divinely named. And when you spell Kabbalah, you can spell it with what? A K, a C, or a Q, right?
Right.
Kabbalah. And that's kind of the name of Kabbalah itself kind of epitomizes the art form, because letters are interchangeable, but phonetic sounds are not. Phonetic sounds are actually kind of the most concrete value that
they're
the
key. They're the compass of the system. That makes sense.
Yeah. So you can interchange C, K, and Q. Well, I'll show you why Cuba bears the name Q. That Gulf of Mexico, that perfect crescent that we're talking about, and then the star coming into the crescent like this. When the star is coming into the crescent, it's actually forming a Q, of which Cuba is almost like the sperm fertilizing that egg, that big, and this is no coincidence. It's not like it's just shaped like a fertile egg. No, this is the most fertile place on the planet. Okay, you can grow anything in Florida. You can grow anything in the Gulf Coast of Mexico. Costa Rica, the Caribbean too. When Columbus went through the Caribbean on his second and third voyages, he said, "This is Eden. This is paradise. I know it for sure." And blah blah blah. When we're saying this is a fertile zone, I mean it. Like this is, it's not just the vegetation and the good climate, it's the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream is everything. The Gulf Stream, in times of great cataclysm and freezing and flooding, it's the Gulf Stream that would
Thaw.
essentially choose what places would survive these catastrophes and
Mhm.
resets, natural resets, a freezing, a flooding. And after a worldwide devastation, it would be the area closest to the Gulf Stream that would bounce back to 100%. So a lot of people will try and dispel the Garden of Eden theories and say, "Oh, you don't know what anything was like before the flood." And I agree with that, except for the Gulf Stream, because if there's one place in the world that would revert perfectly back to where it started after a flood or a freezing, it would be the Gulf Stream, because we know the first areas to thaw out after ice ages is the Gulf Stream.
Mhm.
And the Gulf Stream, and where it chooses to send its water north, like Iceland. I have an article that shows if the Gulf Stream were to divert just a tad, a bit away from Iceland, Iceland would turn into an ice cube in a matter of years, a solid block of ice,
Mhm.
because the Gulf Stream is what gives it all of its um, thermal nuance. Same with Finland, the entire Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland. That entire area would be frozen through much of the year if
Mhm.
it were not for the Gulf Stream.
But
Same.
it's amazing because for those of you out there that don't know, the Gulf of Mexico is the warmest body of water per volume. So
Mm,
there's other bodies of water in the world that are warm. I think the Dead Sea gets
yeah,
pretty hot, but
uncomfortably hot. It should be noted.
yes, but the
Mm,
Gulf of Mexico has it's there's nothing even comparable to it anywhere in the world that's a saltwater body that's that warm and
mm,
that large.
yep.
And it's not all that deep. And it's an amazing thing. The
Mm,
stratification of temperature within the Gulf of Mexico, the scientists have always been trying to figure it out because there's very delineated lines of temperature differential that they can't explain
mhm.
within the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah,
I really wonder what happened in 2011 with the Deepwater Horizon. I'm wondering what they were doing with all that. What was that? What were they spraying in the Gulf?
I don't know.
They were spraying a chemical that would cause the oil to drop. I'm forgetting the name of it.
Oh
So
shit.
normally the oil would stay on the surface and then the winds would push it to the coasts.
Yeah.
But they used this chemical that essentially dropped it to the first thermal stratification layer,
Hmm.
which was like 100 feet below. So you couldn't see it, but it was all there. So it ended up destroying tons and tons of wildlife.
Yeah.
Um,
Terrible.
but I really wonder because that year they had two onslaughts on our consciousness. One was the Fukushima, and then the other one was the Gulf of Mexico. So it was like they're trying to like poison, because when you look how the water flows off of Japan up towards Alaska, it
Hmm.
has that whole warming effect on the Pacific side of things. And then they are doing the same thing. They're sort of poisoning the well in the
Hmm.
Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, you also had the BP oil spill and Katrina.
Right.
You had a lot of stuff.
Katrina was wild. Did you ever follow the origin and how it moved through the Gulf of Mexico?
No, I think I was like probably like 9 years old when Katrina came through.
So
So,
when I was growing up, my dad and I, we'd always just chart them coming off of Africa, and they were very
hmm.
consistent. They always had this nice parabolic curve, and you kind of knew within, 10 degrees where they were going. So Katrina started in the Caribbean right off of Costa Rica, went up
Hmm.
over Guatemala, sat on top of Honduras for 3 days, killed
Wow.
killed 50,000 people. I forget whether it was Guatemala or Honduras, created all these mudslides. Then it took a beeline towards Florida. It went over Florida, I think a little bit north of Fort Myers, cut across, went through Palm Beach, went over my house in Palm Beach, then went out to the Bermuda Triangle, did a 180-degree turn in the Bermuda Triangle, came back, went through South Broward, went through Fort Lauderdale, went through Fort Myers on the other side, or excuse me, lower. It went through, it's that Marco Island, that one island you bring up. Goes through Marco Island, is going due west, and then makes a 90-degree turn and accelerates once it hits the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. So show me what weather front could cause that type of movement.
Yeah, it's like a game of pinball.
Yeah.
Yeah, they gave it some extra juice before it hit New Orleans too.
And what I love about you talking about these massive trees, you bring up in a lot of your videos, these would have been a wonderful windbreak. So before all this fuckery with the weather, if you had these massive, trees like Home Tree in Avatar, or like they show, what is it called? In Idaho, the Devil's Peak, Nevada.
Devil's Tower.
Devil's Tower.
Like that. Yeah.
I mean, that tree's a mile high, If you had your whole windbreak on both coasts of these massive trees, you would have this garden in the middle. It'd be completely protected.
That's you're right. You're exactly right. And that's overwhelming evidence for Plato's Atlantis.
Exactly.
Because Atlantis and Eden are the same myth. And most people don't realize that.
Could you break that down? Break that down.
So not only most people can wrap their head around the New Testament largely being inspired by Greek texts, like Greek philosophers. A lot of the New Testament is Plato, just being boiled down, kind of distilled into this Jesus story. And so I'm a big lover of the Bible, but the Old Testament also owes much to the Greek. We're kind of given the narrative that Hebrew, the Jews took these stories from the desert, and that's not necessarily true. The myth and the linguistics show this to just be nonsense. The Old Testament also comes from Greek myth. And this can be shown how in paradise, the word paradise and the garden in paradise is directly taken from the Greek myth of the Garden of Hesperides. So the Garden of the Hesperides, who were also nicknamed the Atlantides, by the way.
Wow.
So the Garden of the Hesperides is where we get the word paradise. So Hesperides, named for Hesperus, Atlas and Hesperus. Atlas is Adam, number one. Atlas, Adam. Same prefix, different suffixes, right? So then you have the Hesperides are 3 women, 3 daughters, and the daughters are nicknamed the daughters of the evening, or the sisters of the evening. So that's your Eve right there. You have Atlas and the 3 Hesperides, who are the 3 Atlantides, because the central figure of that myth is Atlas. Atlas and his 3 daughters of the evening in the Garden of Hesperides is Adam, Eve, and the Garden of Paradise. And both of these myths feature a snake in the tree. And if you saw a picture of it, you don't need any convincing. But in ancient depictions of the Garden of Hesperides, there's a snake in the tree surrounded by 3 women, not just one. So that's really the only difference. And then Atlas is nearby. And this is the Greek myth. And like I said, the Hesperides are also referred to as the Atlantides. Plato said that Atlantis or maybe it was Herodotus, sorry, it might have been Herodotus, said that Atlantis and the Garden of Hesperides were within walking distance of each other.
I didn't know that.
Yes, so Eden and Atlantis in walking distance of each other. Now, another dead giveaway is the fact that Atlantis was traced by a canal, by a canal, and Florida, the entire peninsula of Florida, and much of the southeast United States, even up to like New York, partially, is protected by a barrier, a strip of barrier islands. Now in Florida, it's where these barrier islands are most consistent and have the least breaks in them.
It's called the intercoastal.
Intracoastal, yeah.
And you know, I have my mother's side of the family was military, and they came down to Florida in the 50s, and I grew up hearing that these waterways were dug by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
They were dredged by the Army Corps of Engineers. That's true.
That's a huge difference.
Now, when they came here, the entire intercoastal waterway was existent. However, it was freshwater at the time. It was more fresh than brackish.
Right.
Today, it's brackish because they cut inlets into the intracoastal.
And by the way,
into the barrier island, they cut.
By the way, those cuts that they made, that's the biggest scam to sell global warming. So growing up and fishing all these waterways and stuff like that, when I saw Al Gore's, Inconvenient Truth in the early 2000s, they kept talking about the oceans rising, the oceans rising, the oceans rising. And what they would do is they would show these shots of beach erosion. But the one thing that they wouldn't show you is the beach erosion was always down from where they punctured the intercoastal waterway. So where you normally had that fresh sweet water like you were talking about, and then it had a very, very long run of land mass, and then you had the salt water on the other side. When you start to make that permeable all the way up the coast, of course it's going to degrade the beaches. Because now you have the temperature differential between both sides causes a flow, which causes the erosion.
You're absolutely right. Not to mention they take pictures of high tide and compare them to low tide.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing how liberals will not recognize a difference between high tide and low tide in some instances. You know, there's Vizcaya out in Miami. They have this with the limestone boat out in the back. That's like a fake floating structure. And it's a limestone boat. They have a picture of that boat in the 1920s. And they have a water marker, right? Well, and I'm saying this is good. This like completely puts environmentalists in their place, the bad environmentalists, the climate change people,
the victims.
Yeah. So this boat has the same water line on it from 100 years ago, not even an inch lower.
Yeah.
And that's at the southern tip of Florida, which we're told is the most at risk of sea level rise. And as far last time I checked, the coastline is only going up in value, not down, despite the impending doom. Right.
The underwriters wouldn't underwrite it if it was going to go away.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, because I was caught up in that whole mythology from like all the environmentalism for a very long time, but I knew when they started showing the puncture holes within the intercoastal, my family had a beach home up near Vero Beach, and it was very apparent that when they created a new inlet up near Vero Beach, it that's what destroyed the beach. That was it. So that was like just a common sense thing from that point on.
Yeah, and it's going to start crumbling a lot of the limestone underneath people's houses because now you have salt water running through a lot of what used to be fresh groundwater underneath a lot of that land along the coast. But yeah, you're right. And intercoastal is a dead giveaway that peninsular Florida is at least part of Plato's Atlantis. And in addition to that, the Gulf of Mexico, Atlantis was said to have an inland sea, a crystal sea. And in this crystal sea, boats could sail without fear of wreckage. And it was so calm that you could walk out hundreds of yards into the sea. That's the Gulf of Mexico. And Florida, like you're saying with the breakwind, the trees that would have stopped these hurricanes dead in their tracks. Florida itself is a breakwater. So the entire Florida peninsula and the Yucatan Peninsula are perfectly, divinely located breakwaters. And not Tampa Bay. We're going to get to Tampa Bay, but the Gulf of Mexico is the largest, most hospitable bay in the world. Now, within that bay, Gulf, right? Gulf is just a big bay. Within that bay, you have another bay, which is even more hospitable and agreeable and calm, and that is Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay, which I did not grow up in, and I don't spend a lot of time in, and I never particularly liked. Tampa Bay is, in fact, the capital seaport of Atlantis, or the iteration of Atlantis that most of us are familiar with, being after this, the Ice Age, where civilization kind of picked up again. And Atlantis itself actually means all the land ice. All the land is ice. Atlantis. And paradise means before the ice. So paradis. Paradis means before the ice. This is also where we get the words like ice.
Say that again. You cut out.
We also get words like isolation.
Okay.
To be isolated, because before well, that's another story.
But I want to get to the before, because this is, you're building this wonderful, in a very specific way, a chronology. We're going back to essentially the time of Moses. We're going back. The hypothesis here is that North America continent was the old world, the Book of Remembrance, the Old Testament world, where the origin of this particular epoch that we're in. This is the land. And are you familiar with Slick Dissident, Gabriel?
I am a little bit. I'm not like, I haven't met him directly, but we're in the same circles. Yeah,
through Juan and Juan, like Slick Dissident and Juan. So he's done his tarot tories, and I know you're astrologer into tarot, and the way he's wove this whole thing along the Mississippi, and when you see the Mississippi with his tarot tories, it all fits this story, because he's linked the Greek mythos of Typhon to the North American continent. And when the story of Typhon, where Typhon chases Zeus and the other demigods out of there, that's allegorical, or it could be, who knows if it's not allegorical, but let's just say, for sake, that it is allegorical, that essentially that was the shift from the old world to the new world, from the North American continent to the European sub-Saharan area.
Yeah, we kind of get everything after Noah's Ark kind of pretty on the money in terms of the mainstream biblical narrative, and the Greek mythology. But before the flood, we're really grasping at straws without understanding, like you're saying, how North America fits into all this, because this is not just out of left field stuff. In fact, we as modern Americans are kind of operating at a deficit, whereas this was common information back before 1929, back before the Civil War, back before 1812. This was like established fact that the Southeast United States and the Gulf of Mexico was paradise. They were printing that in Florida newspapers like fucking crazy, saying this is paradise, this is the garden. And it wasn't just to sell land, you know, trust me. They were practically giving a land away for free, you know. They wanted people to whatever. But with all the things going on in Florida, they stomped this all out, whereas it used to be kind of just common sense. And E.E. Calloway, man, that's such a great story. I'm going to be doing another thing on him. He ran for governor of Florida. So he almost made it, you know. I think he lost by a pretty large margin, but still, you know, it's not like he was just a nobody. So he was actually he would talk to multiple US presidents on a pretty regular occurrence. He was in with a lot of the what would you call them, all the best people, so to speak. And for him to be, you know, fielding these theories is just pretty remarkable. And then you have guys like Hilton Hotima, who ironically served in the Spanish-American War out in the Philippines. He was studying long life, and he's an expert of longevity. And he studied centenarians around the world and different diets and climates. And he came to, after decades of research, came to the realization that Florida is the most life-sustaining place in the world. So he lauded the benefits of tropical zones and altitude. You know, he said, yes, altitude's good for this and that. But he said, all things being equal, Florida is the most hospitable place in the world to the human body. You have the water, you have the fruit and the produce, you have the perfect temperature, the seawater. So, you know, for people to live, you know, half the planet lives in places where they are dependent on water from elsewhere. That is such a scary state of existence, isn't it?
It is.
To have your water being piped in from somewhere else, probably paying, you know, cents on the gallon for what it costs to someone else. And, you know, Florida provides enough produce to feed dozens of countries. 50, I've heard people say, 50 countries Florida could provide for every year if it really wanted to. And it does. If you just look at the economics, the agricultural feats that Florida is accomplishing compared to California, which does outperform Florida in many ways, albeit with millions and millions of gallons of
shipped in
what's it
water.
called? Water, exactly. It's crazy. Florida is rivaling California with essentially what falls down from God. Now they do irrigate even oranges, which don't even need that much irrigation down here. But in a perfect world, if people knew what they were doing like you would not need to irrigate Florida. There's so much water coming down. There's no such thing as drought here. You know, even if there is a drought of rain, you have such abundant spring water. It's hilarious. And, you know, I go up to the Appalachian Mountains and we'll fill up these buckets. We'll fill up our 14-gallon, 7-gallon tanks. I have 2 of them. We'll fill them up with mountain water out in the mountains when we're traveling in my van. you know how slow that water comes out of that pipe?
Super slow.
We're there for at least a half hour on a
Yeah.
good day if it's coming out really fast. And that's just like a faucet coming out. In Florida, if I wanted to, I could take those jugs and submerge them and pull them up full in
Yeah.
a second.
Mhm.
So you can't even compare it to other places in the world.
Yeah.
Florida alone having over 1,000 notable springheads, that's more than the next country compared to America.
Yeah, the
So
problem in Florida is too much water. It's like Costa Rica. I've
mhm,
lived in all these places in the world where the problem isn't being
yeah,
dry, it's being too wet. I've lived in
yeah,
Florida, I've lived in Michigan, which is another peninsula that like they just have water popping out everywhere. And
mhm.
down here in Costa Rica, there's so much water. And then I actually I just bought a farm in Missouri that's next to Blue Spring that you were talking about.
Oh, or I think it's Big Spring is the one we
I
went
moved
to.
next to Blue Spring.
Okay.
I'm 4 miles from Blue Spring. The spring that you're talking about is about 100 miles north of me. But
Near the Ozarks,
yeah.
Big Spring.
Well, I'm in the Ozarks too. I'm more in like the real Ozarks up there
Okay.
where that is, up near Columbia. That's technically not the Ozarks anymore.
Okay. So maybe I was I'll see where I was.
Yeah, Blue Spring is massive. It comes out of a cave into this river system, and it's right near, I forget which county it is. It could be Shannon County in
Yes. Yeah, we weren't there. We were at Big Spring. I see Blue Spring. We weren't at that one. We were
yeah,
at Big Spring.
yeah. So I'm a water connoisseur. I'm always trying to find the biggest, best
Yeah.
water. I was kind of disappointed though, growing up in South Florida, because they chlorinated and fluoridated everything so much, and they were pumping sewage into the aquifer to keep the water pressure up.
You know, it's funny. I was talking to the cave diver who knows firsthand better than anybody how much damage is being done to our aquifer.
Hmm.
You want to know what he does when he goes down there?
Drinks alone.
We have nothing to be afraid of. We couldn't damage Mother Earth if we tried. Not in Florida, not the water, not even close. You couldn't throw 1 million gallons of gasoline into the aquifer every day, and
Hmm.
you could still pull out drinkable water. So with our testing today, how sensitive all the testing and the threshold for what constitutes drinkable is not remotely what a human being should actually be concerned with, because these are the same people who tell you it's okay to have milligrams of fluoride in your system.
Right.
So I wouldn't be worried about pollution. I certainly wouldn't be worried about pollution. But if you're going there, you know, Brett, the guy that I had on the cave diver, he goes down about 200, 300 feet down, and he says he'll take off his rebreather and just gulp, gulp, and just eat the water straight
Yeah.
out of, and then put his rebreather back in. And he says that's not even as clean as you want. He says the closest to the surface, the better. He says right where spring water breaks the surface is the cleanest you'll ever find it. So,
Hmm.
you know, even with, and he knows, I don't know how much sewage they're putting down there, and I'll still drink it. He knows how much sewage they're putting down there, and he drinks it like crazy. So I think
Well,
that's
that's he was a that whole system was north of Lake Okeechobee. I grew up in
you're right.
Broward.
You're right.
I grew up in Broward County.
You're right. Now, admittedly, south of Lake Okeechobee, the aquifer system becomes a lot less, not interesting, but no, it just doesn't come to the surface in as many areas. You don't see like the caves breaching with like
Hmm.
um who knows what it originally looked like, but the elevation's like nothing down south of Lake Okeechobee, especially on the East Coast. But north of Okeechobee, in and around Orlando is where the springs start picking up. And I mean, those are like, when you see water coming out like that, glowing turquoise, it's glowing. And you ask yourself, am I hallucinating? Like, is there, when you see pictures of Florida spring water, everyone says the same thing. Please stop showing altered photographs. Please stop, why are you showing altered photographs? It's not altered. It's the quality of Florida spring water that makes it different from just about anywhere else in the world. Is it has trace amounts of lime, trace amounts of what's the quartz crystal, and that can best be displayed at Siesta Key. In Siesta Key Beach, you have a completely mysterious, unexplained phenomenon where they have quartz sand, 99% quartz crystal sand, depositing in Siesta Key Beach, which was, I guess, coincidentally voted America's #1 beach time and time again. So America's #1 beach, Siesta Key, is 99% quartz crystal. And someone might say, well, what does that mean? Like quartz sand. When you go to a regular California, South Africa, East Coast of Florida, it doesn't matter. And you go to that beach, whether it's white, black, well, not black, there's volcanic beaches and this and that. But when you go to other beaches, you will see shell sand and crushed up coral, or even crushed up rock, crushed up volcanic rock maybe, but it's not quartz. You don't find quartz beach sands like this in many places in the world. It happens, but not like this, not in this one unique place where all the sand around it and the other areas is normal shell sand. But for this one little pocket just south of Tampa Bay, Siesta Key, you have a extremely high concentration of quartz crystal. Now they think they know where it's from. They've done their testing and dating, and they think that it's from the Appalachian Mountains, at least 4 million years old. This mysterious deposit of quartz sand.
So check it out. I have a property on the Suwannee River.
Nice.
The Suwannee River actually originates in the southern Appalachian Mountains.
Okay.
So when our property in Florida floods, it's because of rain in Georgia, in the middle of Georgia.
Wow.
So all of that water, because you had the Chattahoochee River system that they dammed up to just above Atlanta to make, I forget what the name of that whole complex of neighborhoods is, but they dammed up the Chattahoochee. But at one time, the Chattahoochee came down, and then that was from the not upper Appalachian, but from up in South Carolina, the Appalachians in South Carolina. And then that connected to the river system of the Suwannee. And where does the Suwannee run? It runs straight down through the middle, like, if you're looking at Florida and it's like, like this, it runs just like this through the Panhandle into the Gulf. That makes perfect sense to me that would deposit that quartz down there in Tampa.
Or it's the quartz of Atlantis that Plato may have been describing. Plato attributes a sinking of Atlantis to quartz and human tampering with quartz crystal.
With time. Yeah, with the whole thing messing with the piezoelectric nature of time.
If you've ever been to St. Petersburg, Florida, that area in that little peninsula, Pinellas County, Florida, produces some of the most metaphysical, spiritual, far out, heady, and I'm not saying they're all good or interesting, a lot of BS artists too, but just psychedelic bohemian people come out of St. Petersburg, Florida, and move to St. Petersburg, Florida. And that area between St. Pete Beach and Siesta Key Beach see some of the largest bonfires in America, and like full moon fires and drum circles is the word I'm looking for.
It's
Drum
very
circles.
bohemian, almost.
Yeah.
The whole. I used to build for the I guess you would call it EDM festival scene.
Hmm.
And a lot of the different guys that I would build for, they would tell me about these huge festivals that they were having in Florida, like in Lake City, Florida, and into
Hmm.
the Gulf of Mexico and stuff like that. So it's a very bohemian area.
Oh, I got another good one for you. So that exact area, Siesta Key is just south of Tampa Bay. When you start going north, you have Siesta Key, Bradenton, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, and then I think Indian Rocks Beach. Indian Rocks Beach is the stone anchors. That's what they used to call them, Indian Rocks. Oh, look at all these Indian rocks by the beach, right?
Mhm.
These are the ancient stone anchors of Atlantis. How funny. And Clearwater is, they also have a Crystal Beach in that area. So Crystal Beach, the Crystal Sea of Atlantis, and Clearwater. So Clearwater, Florida, if you know anything about Clearwater, is where Scientology has its headquarters.
Right.
And Tom Cruise lives and his son, and they have actually purchased a majority of the downtown Clearwater area. So Clearwater, Florida is like an entire Scientologist cult city. It's crazy.
So this is great because I need to follow this thread.
Can I add one more thing to this?
Yes.
That same area, not only do the Scientologists vacation at, that's like their vacation spot, the Amish and
Yes.
Mennonites,
Okay.
for some reason, descend en masse to Clearwater, Florida, Siesta Key, and that whole Pinellas County, Pinellas Peninsula, Siesta Key Beach. For some reason, you see the most Amish, and it's weird, but yeah, what were you gonna say?
So let's get to it. You have the Scientologists and you have the Mormon faith.
Yes.
I've never gone deep into them individually, but I know people that have paid tens of thousands of dollars within Scientology to be audited. And I'm a massage therapist, and so I've
Cool.
been massaging people for quite a long time professionally. And what ends up happening is you end up building a trust, with people that you work with for a long time. So one of my clients, he was in the Church of Scientology for many, 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 many years. And for lack of a better word, he was possessed. And he kept paying all this money to be audited. Like they do this auditing process.
Yeah.
And to me, it was just a big shakedown. They were just shaking them down.
Mm-hmm.
But he revealed to me some of the higher tenets of Scientology, like what they believe. And it was very odd to hear it because it sounds like straight up science fiction. And when I read, like when I was a little kid, a book that was really popular was the book Dianetics. It was L. Ron Hubbard's, big claim to fame that got everybody moving in that direction that was into that stuff. But so it's a very off-world at the top, like the people that kind of run everything. It's a very alien-centric, let's just call it cosmology. So I've also had Mormon friends of mine that their cosmology at the top of that pyramid is very alien-centric too. And
somewhat, yeah. Oh yeah.
And so it's I mean, to some extent, if you look at Christian cosmology and you say, oh well, the sons of God came and mated with the hot earth girls, that's an alien cosmology. But I'm just looking at this because I don't know what the origin story of Scientology is, but I know the Mormons, their belief pattern is that North America, the North American continent, was the home of how many lost tribes, did they say?
I mean, I don't know the story that well, but at least three. You have Nephites, Jaredites, and this might not be the homeland, but present in the Americas well before Columbus, thousands of years ago. Jaredites, Nephites. So this is like where you get your word Nephilim.
Uh-huh.
It's not the way we've been told it. It's the Nephites,
Uh-huh.
who were in Southeast United States, who over time we would come to know as the giant native tribes that inhabited Florida when the Europeans arrived. So you had Nephites, and those are your Nephilim. You have Og. Og came to Og is another character in the Mormon stories who came to the Americas. Well, that story actually mirrors the story of Prince Matok. So Prince Matok has Og at the end of his name. Mad Dog. Mad Dog.
Mad Dog.
Is also Og.
Mm-hmm.
So Og in the Mormon tradition came to the Americas, or left the Americas. I don't remember. But Madoc is essentially a Welsh Viking who seeded much of refined Native American culture, the higher culture that was to be found in some of these people. When the Europeans arrived, they found some of them occupying castles and using more advanced weaponry and using more advanced braiding and textile techniques. And they theorized that these people must have descended from Celtic Vikings, and that languages like Cherokee were very close to Welsh. And it was mainly the Mandan tribe. So Mandan, you also have your word Dan right there, which is Dan, the tribe of Dan, the Danites, which means like the seafarers and all this stuff. Yeah, we have such a misunderstanding of Native American culture. You can see how they spell a lot of Native American words with just like way more consonants and vowels than they need to. And that's purely done to obscure how etymologically similar some American words, Native American words, are to Old World words. So, yeah, I have a bunch of articles. I'm going to be doing a video. I'm going to be releasing a video soon that really focuses on the Greek connections and overlays between ancient Greece and the Byzantine Empire and Ottomans with Florida and the Florida, the Crescent, the Greek colonies in Florida before Americans were here. The Keys of Florida are the Turkeys. And I have a satirical map from Life magazine that shows a what if scenario if America never entered World War I. And on this map, they actually gave Florida to Turkey, and the rest of America was taken by Prussia. So when we talk about how much of inland America is inhabited by Mennonites and Amish people who today speak Dutch and German, High German, that there's your Prussia, New Prussia of like mainland America, and peninsular Florida was given to the Ottomans. Well, Ottoman are the Muscovies, and in Florida you have Muskogees. And then you have the St. Petersburg, Russia, St. Petersburg, Florida. But yeah.
That's wonderful. So I've heard, so I want to get back to the whole, the Christian cosmology, because I've heard in Russia, and I don't know this, I'm just hearing all this secondhand, in Russia, they're much more Orthodox Christianity. And then I had heard that what had happened during the Bolshevik Revolution was essentially the Coptic Christians were massacred.
Mhm.
Like something like 60 million over 30 years were eliminated out of that area. So I want to know what the origins, like what the storyline behind the Coptic Christian, because if you're making this link from Russia to St. Petersburg, St. Petersburg, Russia, down to St. Petersburg, Florida, and then you're
Well,
talking about
it's the other Roman Empire. When we hear Rome, we think of Rome, the Western Roman Empire. We think of what turned into Catholicism.
right.
Well, what turned into Russian Orthodox? No, well, not just Russian, but Orthodox Christianity was largely the Byzantine Empire, and even the Ottomans partially. But for those that don't know, when you hear Byzantine and Ottoman, especially Byzantine, you can kind of think of Greek culture mixing with Arabic or Islam culture, as well as much Slavic culture. So this interphasing between Greek, Russian, and Arabic is the same exact admixture that you find in Florida, whether it's the cultural influence, whether it's the names of the cities, whether it's this or that. St. Petersburg, which I've pointed out a couple times already. You also have the support of Cuba by Russia. You have I forget.
Bro, you would laugh. Like before 9/11 occurred that year in Hollywood Beach, Florida, at the Greek, they had these Greek nightclubs where it was opas, and they would be breaking dishes. Everybody's crazy, getting up on the tables and dancing. Guess what? Like the club music that was being played, it was all Middle Eastern.
Wow.
So it was so crazy because after 9/11 occurred, nobody was allowed to play Middle Eastern music.
Wow.
It pretty much, like anything that had like any type of Muslim influence was instantly negated. It made the nightlife so shitty because, like, for a lot of us that didn't drink or whatever, like going to these Greek restaurants where they would dance and they'd have live music and you get up on the tables and like get all nutty that way. That was so much fun, but they were always playing these Muslim jams in the back. Almost sounded like belly dancing music. It was so awesome because it was live and like everybody was like just moving there. It was just awesome. And 9/11 completely eliminated that. Like that was gone. So you brought up this theory in a few of your videos that I love, where I forget the exact name of it. It's the spawning theory. Like wherever you're spawned from, you'll come back to. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So John Saxer has theorized who discovered the anchors that I made a documentary on called the Saxer Stones. These Saxer Stones were by John Saxer, and what led him to kind of piece together a lot of the Atlantis pieces of the puzzle, the Atlantis puzzle, was that in the area that he was living when he moved down to Florida, he found himself in Pasco County or Pinellas Pasco County in Tarpon Springs. Tarpon Springs is the most Greek city in America. And he was just kind of dumbfounded. How is it that the ancient stone anchors are here? And then you have all these Greek people who, like, if you know about the Greeks of Florida, they're just very dependent on seafood and, maritime activity. That's why they came here. Well, those Greeks in 1760s, officially, this is like the mainstream history, there was a colony that was ran by Scottish company, the British East Florida Company, or East Florida Company was a company of Scotsmen who decided to colonize the northeast coast of Florida in the 1700s. And they did so not with Scottish or British people, but with Ottomans, with Greeks and Turks and Spaniards and Italians from the Mediterranean in the 1700s, from what was British territory. So the British Navy had a lot of territory in that area, and they were indenturing people into servitude and shipping them to Florida. So that's how you get 1,500 Greeks. And when I say Greek loosely, because at this time it was under Ottoman control. So you had Greeks, Menorcans, Spaniards, Italians, and Turks all shipped over to Florida. And today you have over 60,000 descendants of these Greeks and Menorcans in the St. Augustine and New Smyrna area alone. That's where the word New Smyrna comes from. New Smyrna is Smyrna, an ancient Greek city in modern day Izmir, Turkey.
Wow.
They named Florida New Smyrna, this city in Florida. So with the New Smyrna, you have 60,000 Greek people still living there today, Menorcans and Greeks. And there's a pepper, I think you'll like this. There's a pepper called the Datil pepper. And the Datil pepper, Datil pepper, D-A-T-I-L. I don't know. No, there's a lot of different pronunciations. The Datil pepper, they do not know where it comes from. They don't know the origin. They don't know the history, nothing. It's a little bit related to like a habanero. It looks like a habanero. It's like an orange pepper, but it doesn't crinkle. It's like long, like a habanero, but orange like a habanero, but like a jalapeno. And basically it originates, they don't know where it originates, but it's endemic, or believed to be endemic. I'm using words I shouldn't be using. It's not endemic, but they don't know anything else about it. And it only grows in the St. Augustine area, St. John's County, Northeast Florida, between Jacksonville, St. Augustine, and New Smyrna, Florida. It's the only place that this pepper grows well. And they don't know where it came from, but they know that the Menorcans who moved to Florida in the 1700s used this pepper, and this pepper is attached to Menorcan culture. So they don't know where it comes from, because originally that pepper had to come from South America, right? Well, then we're told it went to Menorca and was bred into a unique pepper. Then they took that pepper back to the Americas, where it miraculously only grows in this small part of Florida.
I'm not buying it.
That's the narrative we're given.
I'm not buying it.
Yeah. Well, you also, you gotta check under the furniture every once in a while. And like I said, people look at the architecture, but we gotta sweep beneath the pews too, so to speak. We gotta look at the nitty-gritty, things like cuisine and also animals. What was the bird that was almost America's national bird?
What was it?
The turkey.
Okay.
So Benjamin Franklin was dead set on the turkey being the American bird. He said the turkey is the phoenix. Its plumage it's like a peacock, only better, And there's some breeds of turkey that are more brilliant, like a peacock. And you also have, so there you have your turkey. We have to look at all these birds' names. Turkey, named for Turkey, by the way. That's not by chance. They saw a bird that was so exotic. This is what we're told. They saw a bird that was so exotic. They said, wow, that looks like it's from Turkey. It looks like the plumage and the headdress, and looks like it's from the Middle East. Well, can you guess where the word pheasant comes from? A fez.
Yeah.
the fez of the Moors with the
Yes.
plumage. Well, the native Seminoles and the Muskogees wore fezzes with plumage and bird feathers. Now, what about a Muscovy duck? Muscovy ducks. Where does the Muscovy come from? Muscovy means a place in Russia. Those ducks don't live in Russia. So why are they called Muscovy ducks? Well, maybe it's because the Muscovites were in Florida, but they're not Muscovites as we know them. They're today found to be the Muskogees. So the Muskogees are here in Florida. The Muscovies are in Russia, but we have Muscovy ducks here in Florida and all around the Gulf Coast and Caribbean. So what else? There's a couple other birds like that. I could give you another. I got to hop off here in a sec.
No problem.
Get some dinner, but I'll give you another one. The military. I'm drawing from the Bach saga here, but I've improved on it a little bit with the English language. The Bach saga is basically a Finnish folklore that revolves around etymological phonetics and how, it's basically a Germanic Kabbalah in a sense, where each syllable has a meaning and each word has a history and a story and all this stuff. And I can't do it justice, so check out the Bach saga if you're interested. But according to the Bach saga, do you know where the military comes from? Where the practice of having a military, a group of people dedicated to war making and killing and armaments and all this. This is not human nature. This came about not too far ago, but this is not human nature. We were not killing. We were not, fooling around with guns before.
I agree.
So basically, all death-making regiments and companies and armies and military forces, all of them on the planet prior to Atlantis times, in paradise times, you had baby making systems. These were fertility armies of life creating men, not life destroying men. And that might sound like a leftist's pipe dream, right? Well, I can prove it to you. It's right there in the linguistics. And it wasn't until after the flood that the structure of the military was preserved, but the application was inverted.
Inverted, yeah.
So you still have all of these linguistic traces that prove to us that the military system is a life-creating order, not a life-ending order. And I'll prove it to you right here. I just have to read a little bit. The ones I can remember off the top of my head: infantry. Okay. You have your infantry. These are men dedicated to the production of infants. Then you have your foot soldiers. Your foot soldiers are foot sole dyers. These are the men who are dyeing the soles of the feet of the baby that are born. When you were born, a doctor took ink in your foot and inked your foot and had your sole print. Your sole print. This is where foot soldiers come in. You also have your commander. Well, I wonder what that one has to do. Well, yeah. So you also have your lieutenant. What's a lieutenant? Your lieutenant is when you go to the bathroom. Yeah, and you're tending to someone who is in the bathroom. That might have had to do with some retrieval of certain fluids, perhaps. Yes. Who knows? But a lieutenant. It's right there in the words. But let me look at another one. Now I have to look at the ones I wrote down. Corporal. Corporal means corpus has everything to do with the body, everything to do with the creation of a body. Corporal. So to bring something into existence, a corporation. people say, "Oh, corporation, it's a death. It's death. It means death," and that's true. There's truth to that, but it is originally in paradise times all energy destroying art forms were energy manifesting art
Mm-hmm.
forms. So let me look at another one. With from corporal, if you don't want to look at it as corporal body, you could also look at it as copperal, or to copulate, copulation,
Mm-hmm.
corporal. But let me look at another one. You might have a private. I wonder what a private is. Your private parts. Are you starting to see how overwhelming this
Yes.
is?
Yes,
How
definitely.
it almost can't be refuted. Now let's look at some others.
You were going to say, though, in the Bach tradition, where did they say that the actual military began? Where?
It's
Where?
always been here. It's always been here, and I mean, okay, I shouldn't speak for the Bach Saga. That's my own opinions, but
Okay.
in the Bach Saga, they're working off of a timeline that's kind of in like the 55 million, 50 million ballpark
Oh, oh wow.
of yeah, it's kind of hard to. That's where I kind of step away from the Bach Saga, but it has such gold nuggets like the one I just showed you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've contributed to that because they're using the Finnish language largely. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but shout out Carl Borgen, who wrote the Bach Saga book. Definitely worth a read. Um, I would have
Well,
to open that book to see some of the other ones, but
well, speaking of a read, I know you want to go. I want to come and see you at your bookstore. I'm going to be in South Florida as of this Sunday. So,
okay,
yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it'd be cool to come up and check out your bookstore. And where can people find you other than the Old World Florida YouTube page?
Um, old_world_Florida on Instagram.
Hmm.
I've got a Twitter, but I don't remember what the name is, so it doesn't matter. And yeah, that's it, really. The YouTube, best place to stay tuned.
This has been awesome. I feel like we've just barely touched what I want to get into, but
Sure.
I understand you've been a marathoner the last couple of days, so I'll let you
Yeah.
go. But
I didn't show anything the whole time too, so we'll do it again and I can maybe present a little bit more and show some stuff that goes
yeah,
along with what we're saying.
and I won't throw such a fastball to start off with.
That's okay, don't worry. That's that's good. I was just a little high.
No problem, my man. Well, I look forward to seeing you in person, and I'll send everybody your way, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.
All right,
Appreciate it.
talk to you soon.
Have a good one.
I hope you enjoyed the interview with Dr. Narco Longo. Please check out his videos at Old World Florida. I'm going to be doing a follow-up with him very soon. He only had, about an hour and a half. He was marathoning it the night before on his YouTube channel because he had 25,000 subs. So he's grown in great popularity because he's actually given us some really, really good info. And the thing that I love about him is that he backs it up. Like, he does field studies, he goes and interviews people, he gets to feel things with his hands and feet. Like, he actually gets to these areas that he's describing, which is really kind of cool. It's the proper way of doing things from my perspective. I have a request in to Michelle Gibson, because Michelle Gibson, if you don't know her channel on YouTube, she's been exploring the whole Moorish side of the old world, which is the new world, which is the old world. So I'm going to have her, I'm interviewing her because along with the Mormon cosmology and what she's revealing and Old World Florida is revealing, it's really neat. I think we might be traipsing on Typhonian land. This Monday I have an interview with Cal Washington. He is a personal, I guess you would say, icon to me. He's not an idol, he's an icon. He's been an inspiration to me when it comes to training yourself with the law, but it's the law coming from a spiritual perspective. And he figured out the whole system was running on law merchant. So what that essentially means is, at the end of the day, everything is transacting through some sort of monetary value. And when you learn what's happening in the world with how they're trying to digitize our biology and make predictions and off of that for securities, what he has to say makes a ton of sense, because it just seems like at every window they keep trying to create new markets for new monetary instruments, new securities. So I'm really looking forward to that interview. I will post that. I'm going to bump a couple people and put that up immediately, because the Empower movement has they went ahead and published their notice of liability, which I think is very important for those people that are staking the claim as a man or woman in good standing on their property. So please like and subscribe, share. The podcast is going great. Our numbers are growing weekly. We're going to do live streams pretty soon here, once I get my crew on site, and we'll be good to go. Thank you for your time and attention, and hit us up on the Telegram chat. It's the BioCharisma podcast on Telegram chat, and I usually answer back within a day or two. All right, have a good one.